It's time to start unweaving the threads that run throughout the systems we all live in. Systems that are supposed to provide care. Systems that are supposed to heal or support. It is time to unweave those systems. I'd like to begin by being brave and share a moment in my story. I remember Sonny always being in the kitchen, and that was my favorite place to be, just watching him. He fascinated me, and not just because of his sheer height or his brown skin that was such a contrast to mine, but because he was gentle when nothing else around me was. Sonny was maybe my third or fourth foster home, and also he was the only person in the entire world who would ask me questions. But he didn't just ask, he also listened. He would stop what he was doing and listen to me. And he listened in other ways too. Through trial and error, he discovered that I was a huge fan of collard greens, cooked in bacon. And one day, he made me an entire pot. He told the others who gathered around our tiny little table to keep their paws off and winked at me and said I could go in the fridge whenever I want and eat them all up until they were all gone. Sonny's home was maybe the first place that I remember feeling what love felt like. That home was also a place I was being sexually abused by one of Sonny's grandkids. And it was also the first time I experienced being punched in the face at school because I had no idea what was going on in the habits or cultures that surrounded me. It didn't help that I was a bit out of it all the time from the medicine the doctors put me on. They hoped that it would heal me from my depression, and they were convinced that depression came within me and not from the experiences around me. My mind couldn't seem to slow down when I was awake or when I was asleep. Memories of my real brother and sister were always in there. And I wasn't allowed to talk to them because they give you time to settle in at your new home. At 11, I was just also learning how to write my real last name, since the one my manic mom gave me turned out to not be my legal one. But the social workers did not have time to explain that to me either. Then one day, I had to leave my Sonny. It turns out that Sonny's home was not a home at all. It was just an emergency house that had to keep me a little bit longer than expected because there were no empty beds available. That day I left, me and him waited together on the front steps, waiting for the exchange of a human body. Same routine, new social worker. All at once, I wanted to sob, hug him, run, say I'm sorry for some reason I still can't understand, or maybe hit him. So I ran through the consequences in my head. I knew that running or hitting him would land me in the detention center again because I was breaking house rules that were so clearly stated on my child protection papers. If I acted too depressed, they'd send me back to the psych ward for more meds. Yet it was hugging him and telling him I loved him that felt like it held the greatest consequence. So I slammed the small backpack of all I owned into the back of the car, and I slammed the door. "She'll be okay," said the social worker, after yelling at me to buckle up so she wouldn't get in trouble if we got in an accident. Sonny was out of sight, as was the pot of collard greens with bacon in the fridge, as was my ability to feel visible. That child protection system was confusing to me. Why was this happening? Who was to blame? Did I blame the cop who brought me to detention? Did I blame Sonny for not fighting for me? Did I blame my mom for being sick? Or the social workers who never even found the time to put down the keys, let alone talk to me in our sessions? At the end of it, I just blamed myself and absorbed it all as little people do when questions are ignored or too hard to answer. The cycles of 15 revolving doors meant the creation of many more brutal moments in my story that also encouraged me to build a shield of iron, one that protected me and kept me at great distances from others that would stay with me well into my adulthood. All I would think about in that chaos was reaching this age of 18 when I would finally feel freedom. However, our plan's first touch with reality is always where they seem to fail, and mine failed big time. It was terrifying to be untethered from anyone or anything or any rules or any parents who couldn't remember my name. I didn't yet realize the depths to which I was feeling alone could go until then. But then I was about to learn a very important lesson at exactly the right time. I was given my first job to be a leader at a camp where American kids go during their summer times. Diversity was really abundant here. Poor kids came from inner city Chicago on buses, and SUVs dropped off girls from the richer neighborhoods. The places these girls called home were not that far apart in miles, but in America, it feels worlds apart. As an 18-year-old, I'm sure I was just as scared as the girls. Everything was new. And I couldn't imagine how I was going to guide these little people into sharing the stories that I knew lived within them, if only to help them be seen, if only for one summer. Google's lame icebreakers did not work, and neither did my sneaky plan of allowing them to get away with a few broken rules. Maybe they could find unity in that. Maybe they could find unity in rebelling against me as their leader. Then one night in the dark, as we listened to the frogs croaking loudly outside the screen windows, one girl gathered the courage to ask one question. What makes you scared? One by one, the girls shared, without ever being interrupted, advised, or reassured. When everyone had gone, one of them asked me to answer. Maybe the sleeping bag gave me a little bit of extra courage I needed that day to answer truthfully. And I realized, looking back, that it would have been the same answer I had when I left Sunny's house that day, and I was about the same age as them. I said, everything scares me. The next day, everything changed for our group. This one little tiny question liberated us. It liberated us to be more ourselves, to share more. We laughed more, we created more. We took way more risks, we had a ton more conflict, experimented with who we were more. We sat in circles more. And we cared about the space between us much, much more than we ever had. The space the circle cultivated allowed me to become less scared of everything and able to see through a new lens what a healthy system could be. It also helped me to reluctantly, yet honestly, become thankful for the resiliency, the grit, and the wisdom the moments in my story had now built me to be. The circle and those little leaders helped me to see that underneath our stories, we share more than we can ever know. At the end of the summer, I felt less untethered, and I also noticed my power to connect with anyone around me, anytime I choose, if I continue to be brave and keep sharing. So understanding this veered my life in a brand new direction, away from the sickening statistics fueled by the foster care system, including, but not limited to, jail, suicide, drugs, to name the obvious ones. Although there are impacts as important as that, but very hard to see. That was the summer I also fell in love. I fell in love with building healthy systems, and even more excited to transform unhealthy ones. It has now become my work and my company, created with many who share those values.